At my daughter-in-law's family dinner, she looked right at me and said it in front of everyone. Dad, with all due respect, you spent 30 years taking orders. You don't exactly have the background to weigh in on financial matters. What she didn't know was what Dorothy had been quietly building for 3 decades while I was overseas. I want you to stay with me until the end of this, friends. And when you're done, drop a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. My name is Harold Carter. I spent 31 years in the United States Army Infantry, logistics, 2 tours in the Gulf, 1 in Afghanistan. I came home in 2009 with a bad knee, a chest full of ribbons, nobody outside a base ever recognized, and the most important thing I'd ever been given. Time. Time with Dorothy. She'd waited for me through all of it. Every deployment, every 6-month silence, every phone call that crackled through 6 time zones and still somehow made her laugh. Dorothy was a kindergarten teacher in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She drove a 10-year-old Civic, clipped coupons on Sunday mornings, and had the sharpest mind of anyone I've ever known in or out of uniform. When I finally hung up my uniform for good, she was standing at the kitchen door with coffee and that smile, and I thought, this is the part I fought to get back to. We had 14 good years together after I retired. Our daughter Renee grew up, went to law school, married a man named Griffin Aldridge III. Yes, the third who worked in private equity in Charlotte. Griffin had an MBA from Duke, a firm handshake, and an opinion about everything. He was the kind of man who used the word capital the way other people use the word money, and who had never, not once in the 5 years I'd known him, asked me a single question about my life. Dorothy passed away 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way that disease always is. She was here in October and gone by February. I held her hand through every treatment, every hard conversation, every night she couldn't sleep. When it was over, I was 64 years old, alone in the house we'd shared, and completely hollowed out. 3 weeks after the funeral, we sat in the office of an estate attorney named Weaver, on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Charlotte. Renee sat next to Griffin. I sat across from them in a chair that was too modern to be comfortable, still wearing the same dark blazer I'd worn to bury my wife. Attorney Weaver was methodical. He laid out the will clearly. Dorothy had left Renee her mother's jewelry, the china, the dining room set we'd bought at an estate sale in 1997. She'd left Griffin, and here I noticed Weaver pause slightly, a watercolor painting Dorothy had loved, the one of the Blue Ridge she'd bought at an art fair in Asheville. And to me, Dorothy had left a personal letter, sealed, and a sum of $12,000 described in the document as household savings. That was it. After 31 years of marriage, Dorothy's formal will left me a letter and $12,000. I felt the floor shift slightly beneath me. Not because I needed money. I had my Army pension, my VA benefits. I wasn't going to starve. But the absence of my name anywhere significant in the document she'd spent her life building, felt like a door closing. Griffin felt it too, but not the way I did. He leaned back in his chair, crossed one leg over the other, and said, "Well, that's settled then." He looked at Weaver, not at me. "We'll need to discuss the property tax situation on the house. Renee is the co-owner of record now, so there are some decisions to be made about what Harold does next." What Harold does next? Weaver cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Carter, your wife did include that sealed letter for you specifically. She asked that you be given a moment to receive it privately." Before I could respond, Griffin spoke again. He turned to me directly for what might have been the first time that morning. "Harold," he said, and he used that patient voice people use when they think they're being kind. "I want to be honest with you, because I think Dorothy would have wanted someone to be. You were a good soldier, I know that. But Dorothy was the financial mind in your marriage. She managed everything. And given your background, the pension, the fixed income, the fact that you never really operated in financial spaces, I think it makes sense for Renee and me to take the lead on whatever assets are involved. You don't need that stress." Renee was looking at the table. "Griffin," she started. "I'm just being practical, Renee. Your father spent his career in the military. Chain of command. Logistics. That's his world. Not investment structures. Not estate management. There's no shame in that, Harold. You served your country. That's honorable. But there's a reason Dorothy structured things the way she did. The words landed exactly where he intended them to. I sat with them for a moment, this man who had never worn a uniform, never slept in a forward operating base, never made a decision under fire, telling me in a law office that my world was too small for what was happening in this room. I thought about 31 years of service. I thought about the men I'd led. I thought about the logistics operations I'd run in theater, coordinating the movement of equipment and personnel across 3 countries simultaneously. I thought about the budget oversight I'd carried as a senior NCO, managing multi-million-dollar supply chains that kept soldiers alive. But I said nothing. Because Weaver was already handing me the envelope, and Dorothy's handwriting was on the front, and right now nothing else existed. Her note was 4 lines. Harold, my love, my constant. I kept a promise to myself that I'd take care of you the way you always took care of us. You'll find the rest with Thomas at Fort Bragg Federal. Box 1182. Trust me one more time. I read it twice, 3 times. The room felt like it was behind glass. Probably a sentimental note, Griffin said to Renee. Not quietly enough. She was always very warm with him. I folded the letter, put it in my jacket pocket, and said nothing. We signed what needed to be signed. Weaver shook my hand with both of his, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read at the time. Outside, in the parking garage, Renee hugged me. It felt genuine, but fragile, like she was apologizing through her arms for something she hadn't said out loud. I'll call you this week, Dad. I drove back to Fayetteville alone. Dorothy's note sat on the passenger seat. I didn't open anything else. I just drove, with the window cracked and the radio off, listening to the sound of the highway. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in Dorothy's chair, the wingback by the bedroom window where she used to grade papers, and I went through every conversation we'd ever had about money. Which was almost none. She handled it. I'd always trusted her to handle it. I brought home the pension and the extra income from the consulting work I'd picked up after retirement, and I handed it over knowing it would be there when I needed it. We never talked about the specifics. It was just Dorothy, organized and steady, making everything work the way she always did. Thomas, Fort Bragg Federal. Dorothy had never once mentioned a safety deposit box. By 6 in the morning, I was dressed. By 8, I was in the parking lot of Fort Bragg Federal Credit Union, watching the lights come on inside. The woman at the front desk recognized Dorothy's name. Her expression shifted into that quiet, careful kindness that people show around grief. Mrs. Carter was a regular, she said. Very organized, very warm. We're so sorry for your loss. Regular. Just like the bank in any story about a woman who kept her own counsel. It took 40 minutes, a death certificate, our marriage license, and a supervisor named Frank who'd apparently known Dorothy personally to get me into the vault room. Frank unlocked box 1182 alongside my key. She set this up about 20 years ago, he said. Came in every few months, regular as clockwork. 20 years. I hadn't known. Inside the box was a large, expandable folder, the kind Dorothy used for school records. It was organized with tabs labeled in her handwriting. Behind each tab were documents I didn't immediately understand. Account statements, certificates, property records, letters from financial institutions. I pulled the first tab. It said, rental properties. There were 3 of them. A duplex in Fayetteville she'd purchased in 2001. A single-family home in Raleigh purchased in 2008. A small commercial property, a storefront in a town called Garner, purchased in 2014. Each had its own file with deeds, mortgage payoff records, and current rental agreements. Every one of them was paid off. Every one of them was generating monthly income that had been flowing into an account I'd never known existed. I set those aside and opened the next tab. Investment accounts. 3 accounts, 2 different firms. The first showed a balance of $618,000. The second, $1,140,000. The third, opened more recently, $490,000. I sat back in the chair in that small vault room and looked at the ceiling. At the bottom of the folder was a large envelope with my name on it, the same careful printing she used on birthday cards. Harold, if you're reading this, you found Thomas, and you found the box, which means you did exactly what I always knew you would. You followed the mission to the end. I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago, and I'm sorry I kept it secret. I wasn't keeping it from you because I didn't trust you. I was keeping it because I wanted to show you. I wanted the moment to be real. When you deployed the first time, I was terrified. Not just about you, about us. About what would happen to me, to our family, if something went wrong. I started thinking about security differently. A teacher's salary wasn't much. But I was careful with yours, and careful with mine, and I started small. The duplex came first. We had the down payment sitting in savings, and I used it. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd say we should wait. Think it over. Be practical. You were always practical in the wrong direction, sweetheart. You practiced caution when you should have trusted me to be bold. I got good at it, Harold. Really good. Every time I held back on something, a vacation we didn't take, a car I didn't replace, a school year where I did summer tutoring instead of resting, it went somewhere. Into something that would still be there when the military finally gave you back to me for good. The investment account started in 2003. I put in $50 a month at first, then $100, then more. As the rental income grew, I reinvested almost all of it. I worked with an advisor named Catherine Morse for the last 15 years. She will call you. I've already told her to expect it. The total is just over $2.2 million, not counting the properties. I want you to have it. All of it is yours. Every deployment you came back from, every missed birthday, every Thanksgiving over a satellite phone, I was here building this for the day you finally came home for good. You came home. And now I'm the one who had to leave. I love you. I have never once in 31 years wished for a different life or a different man. Don't let anyone tell you what you deserve. You've always known what honor looks like. So do I. All my love. Always. Dorothy. I was crying before I finished the second page. Not quietly, either. In a small vault room in a credit union in Fayetteville, North Carolina, I sat with my wife's letter and 31 years of a life I hadn't fully understood until that moment. Dorothy hadn't been a kindergarten teacher who managed the household finances. She had been an investor, a landlord, a planner of extraordinary patience and discipline, who had decided somewhere around 2001 that her husband was going to be taken care of, and then spent 20 years making sure of it. My phone rang that afternoon. Griffin's name on the screen. Harold. Listen, Renee mentioned you went to a bank this morning. I want to make sure you're not taking any rash steps here. Grief can make people act on impulse, and if there are any small accounts that Dorothy kept separate, they may still technically be subject to... I appreciate the call, Griffin. I just want to make sure nobody makes decisions they'll regret. If there are financial documents you're not sure how to interpret, I'm happy to take a look. I deal with this kind of thing every day. There was a particular kind of silence I'd learned in the Army. The kind you hold before you give an order, when you already know the outcome and you're simply waiting for the right moment. I held that silence now. I think I've got it handled, I said. Tell Renee I'll call her soon. I spent the next 2 days at the kitchen table with Dorothy's folder and a yellow legal pad, going through everything. The rental properties alone were generating nearly $4,000 a month in net income. The investment accounts had been growing steadily for 2 decades, through 2 market crashes, through interest rate cycles, through everything. Dorothy had kept detailed notes in the margins of her account statements. Small arrows, circles around dividend reinvestment entries, stars next to companies she felt particularly good about. Harold would like this one. She'd written next to a utility stock she'd bought in 2011. Steady and reliable. Just like him. She had written me into the margins of every financial decision she'd made. 3 days after the bank, I got a call from Catherine Morse, Dorothy's investment advisor. She had the crisp, warm professionalism of someone who'd spent 40 years earning people's trust. "Mr. Carter?" she said. "Dorothy spoke of you constantly. She described you as the best decision she ever made." She paused. She also gave me very specific instructions about what to do if anyone tried to contest the beneficiary designations on these accounts. Beneficiary designations. She set me as the direct beneficiary on every account, set years ago, reviewed annually. These assets pass directly to you outside of probate and outside of the estate. They are not subject to the will or to any other claims. I heard something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. We arranged to meet the following week at Attorney Weaver's office, along with whoever else needed to be present. I called Renee that evening. Dad. She sounded nervous. What's going on? Griffin said you found something at a bank. I did. I want you and Griffin to come to a meeting next Tuesday at Weaver's office. There are some things about your mother's estate that need to be explained. A beat of silence. Should I be worried? No, sweetheart. You should be proud of your mother. The following Tuesday, I arrived at Weaver's office early. Catherine Morse was already there, her briefcase open, her reading glasses on. Weaver greeted me differently than he had the first time warmer, more like a colleague, less like a stranger delivering news. Griffin arrived in his usual way, confident stride, good suit, scanning the room for the power positions. His eyes went to Catherine and I watched his expression recalibrate. Who is this? He asked, not unkindly, but without the courtesy of directing the question to her. Catherine Morse, she said, extending her hand. I was Dorothy Carter's financial advisor for 15 years. Griffin's hand stopped mid-reach. Dorothy had a financial advisor. She did. He looked at me. Something shifted in his face, a small recalculation happening behind his eyes. The kind I used to watch junior officers make in the field when they realized the map didn't match the terrain. Weaver opened the meeting. He explained that Dorothy had structured her estate in 2 layers. The formal will, which covered personal property and household assets, and a second layer of accounts and properties with direct beneficiary designations, which passed entirely outside the will. How substantial are we talking? Griffin asked. His voice had lost some of its boardroom authority. Catherine opened her folder. Mrs. Carter's investment portfolio currently stands at approximately $2.2 million across 3 accounts. In addition, she held 3 income-producing real estate properties in Fayetteville, Raleigh, and Garner, with a combined estimated market value of approximately $800,000, all fully paid off. Net rental income is running approximately $4,000 per month. Renee's hand went to her mouth. Griffin was very still. $3 million, he said, almost to himself. Dorothy was a schoolteacher. $30 million. Dorothy was an investor, Catherine said, and there was nothing unkind in her voice, but nothing soft either. She was exceptionally disciplined, exceptionally patient, and exceptionally private about her financial activities. But where did the capital come from? Griffin pressed. Harold was on a military salary. Those are enough, I said quietly. When you know how to use them. I watched him absorb that. Weaver then produced a second envelope. Dorothy had left it with him directly, sealed, with instructions that it be opened if there were any questions about the disposition of her assets. He handed it to me. I opened it. The room was so quiet I could hear the HVAC system. To my family. If this letter is being read, it means someone has asked why I chose to leave my financial assets to Harold. I want to be very clear. Every dollar in those investment accounts and every down payment on every property came from the income Harold and I built together. He trusted me completely with the money he earned serving this country. He never questioned, never demanded a full accounting, never doubted my decisions. That trust was the foundation of everything. For 31 years, Harold deployed when his country asked him to. He missed birthdays and anniversaries and school plays. He came home with injuries and memories he never complained about. He provided for this family with his back and his discipline and his willingness to do hard things. I took what he gave me and I built on it, because that is what a partner does. I am aware that some people in Harold's life have not always recognized the value of what he is. I know what he is. He is the most honorable man I have ever known. He has earned everything I have left him, many times over. The accounts and properties passed to him directly by law, and I have worked with attorneys and advisors to ensure that structure is unambiguous. If anyone feels this is unfair, I would invite them to spend a day in Harold's boots any day of the 31 years he wore them in service to the rest of us. All my love, Dorothy. When I finished reading, the office was silent. Renee was crying. Not the way she'd cried at the funeral, the sharp, abbreviated grief of someone trying to hold themselves together, but openly, quietly, like something had broken loose. Griffin said nothing for a long time. He sat with his hands folded on the table, looking at a space somewhere between the window and the wall. The MBA, the private equity firm, the Duke pedigree, None of it was useful to him in this moment. Finally, he said, "I didn't know." "Nobody knew," I said. "That was her choice." What I said at the first meeting. He stopped, started again. "I made assumptions about you, about what you understood and what you were capable of. I was wrong." "Yes," I said. "You were." Renee reached across the table and took my hand. We stayed for another hour, going through the formal transition of accounts and documentation. Catherine walked us through the investment structures with patience and clarity, explaining what Dorothy had built and how it had grown. At one point, Griffin asked her a detailed question about dividend reinvestment strategy, and I watched Catherine answer him in a tone that was perfectly respectful, and somehow made clear that the person who had mastered this room was no longer present, but had left excellent instructions. Walking out into the November afternoon, Renee fell into step beside me. "Dad, I'm so sorry, for the first meeting, for not saying anything when Griffin—" "You don't need to apologize for things you didn't say," I told her. "Your mother said all of it. She said it for 30 years. We stood by my truck in the parking garage. She was still holding my hand. "She talked about you constantly, you know," Renee said. "Not about the money, just about you. She'd say, 'Your father would have handled this so much better,' or 'Wait until your father sees this.' I think she was always planning for when you'd be home for good, and then just keeping it. She was waiting for the right moment," I said. "She mentioned that." "She always did love a good reveal." I laughed, for the first time since February. It surprised me. About 4 months after the meeting at Weaver's office, on a Saturday morning in early spring, I was in the backyard working on the garden plot Dorothy had started before she got sick. I'd decided to finish it. Tomatoes, peppers, a row of sunflowers along the fence that she'd always wanted. I wasn't a gardener, I'd told her that more than once. She'd always said she'd teach me. I heard a car in the driveway. Griffin's. He came around the side of the house alone, no jacket, which was unusual for him. He stood at the garden gate for a moment before I waved him in. He looked at what I was doing. The garden stakes, the seed packets organized in a plastic tray Dorothy had labeled in her handwriting. "I didn't know you gardened," he said. "I don't," I said. "I'm learning." He nodded, sat down on the bench along the fence, the one I'd built years ago and never painted, still raw wood. He was quiet for long enough that I kept working. "I've been thinking about what I said," he started, "at Weaver's office, the first time." "Griffin, let me finish." He looked at his hands. "I built my entire understanding of a person's value on certain markers. Education, income type, industry, whether someone worked with their hands or their mind. And I applied that to you without ever actually looking at you." He paused. "Dorothy looked at you. She spent 30 years looking at you and apparently decided you were worth $3 million. She decided it was worth building," I said. "Because of you. Because of what you gave her to work with. Your salary, your trust, your steadiness." He said the last word like he was trying it out. "I don't have that. I make more money in a quarter than you probably made in a decade of service. And I don't have what Dorothy built with your money. I'm not sure I ever could." I set down the trowel, looked at him properly. "You have Renee," I said. "She's got her mother's patience, if you'll let her use it." Something in him shifted. Not everything, not overnight, but something. We talked for about an hour that morning, longer than we'd ever talked in 5 years of being family. He asked about the Army real questions, not polite ones. About what I'd actually done, what command looked like, what it cost. I told him some of it. Not all. Some things you don't translate easily into civilian language, but he listened in a way he hadn't before, and that was enough to start. By summer, I'd finished Dorothy's garden. The sunflowers came in tall and a little lopsided, the way they do the first year. The tomatoes were overzealous. I brought a bag of them to Renee's house on a Sunday, and we sat on her back porch while she and Griffin's daughter, our granddaughter, Eleanor, 2 years old, fearless. Dorothy's eyes exactly ran through the sprinkler in the yard. I hadn't changed much about my life. I still drove the same truck. Still ate breakfast at the same diner on Tuesday mornings. I'd hired a good property manager for the rentals, set up regular meetings with Catherine to review the investments, and let everything largely continue as Dorothy had designed it. I paid off a neighbor's medical debt anonymously, a veteran down the street, Gulf War, complications that his VA benefits weren't quite covering. I funded 2 full scholarships at the local community college in Dorothy's name. I took the trip to Ireland she had apparently begun researching before she got sick. I went alone, which was harder than I expected, and more beautiful than anything I could have prepared for. On the flight home, somewhere over the Atlantic, I thought about what Dorothy had really given me. Not the money, not even the security, though that was real and I was grateful for it every day. She'd given me the truth about myself. All those years of wondering whether I was enough, whether a soldier's resume translated to anything in the civilian world, whether I'd given Renee enough of a father, whether Dorothy had made some compromise, choosing a man whose career meant long absences and hard years, all of it dissolved when I read her words. She'd been writing love letters to our marriage in private, in the margins of investment statements and in small notebooks locked in a government-issue safety deposit box for 20 years. She'd known exactly what I was. The hardest part of grief, I've learned, is that it doesn't finish. It changes shape. In the first months it is a weight. Later it becomes something quieter, a presence at the edge of things, a familiar ache. But there are moments, unexpected ones, when it lifts enough for gratitude to come through. When I can feel what I had, rather than only what I lost. I got one of those moments a few weeks ago, standing at the kitchen sink watching Eleanor toddle through the backyard where Dorothy's sunflowers were coming up again on their own from last year's seeds. Renee was beside me. She put her hand over mine on the counter. "Mom would have loved this," she said. "She planned for it," I said. I raised my coffee mug toward the window, toward the garden, toward whatever's on the other side of a life well shared. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For everything." The sunflowers didn't answer, but the wind moved through them, and that was enough. Now I want to hear from you, friends. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't bother to look closely enough, if you've ever had someone decide what you were worth before they knew your story, tell me about it below. And drop your city or state so I can see where these words are landing. I'll leave 2 more stories on the screen when this one ends. I think you'll find them worth your time. Thank you for being here with me. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is trust someone completely and let them carry what you can't see. Harold never knew what Dorothy was building, but she built it from his faithfulness, his steady presence, his willingness to keep showing up. The people who love us are often working on our behalf in ways we'll only understand later, so love well and trust deeply. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment while leaving behind something worth carrying a lesson about love, trust, and the quiet ways we take care of each other.